We're going to take Theodore in Pennsylvania. You're on with Forrest and Jim.
What's up, Theodore?
Hi, how's it going?
It's going really well, man. How are you?
Pretty good. Just hanging out here home alone. I'm pretty sure I have COVID, so
I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
Thank you for quarantining, though. A lot of people don't do that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it kind of sucks, but whatever.
Yeah.
Easter.
Yeah. All right. So
what can I do for you, man?
Talk about generic subjective continuity and would like to convince us to agree with you. So what is generic subjective continuity?
Okay, so Sam Harris did a podcast episode on it, and that episode was called The Paradox of Death. And I'll try to explain it. So it says that after we die, instead of there being like a black void, an eternal black void that some people envision, like there's going to be a black void after we die, or they call it nothingness or eternal oblivion. Like Richard Dawkins in a review of a book not too long ago, he said that death would be followed by peaceful oblivion, implying that after we die, it's going to be like this eternal experience of peace and, you know, a kind of deprivation of any conscious experience. But what generic subjective continuity says is that after we die, because other brains will be doing consciousness, that death, instead of being followed by a black void, would be followed by yet more experience via other brains. One of the brains that are doing consciousness rather than a black void. And so it's like the same way that you didn't exist, but then a brain was born and that brain started doing consciousness, and that consciousness is, the name of it is Jim. The same thing would happen again, because death would also be the same as non-existence before birth. So once again, if a brain does consciousness after you cease to exist, then the same thing happens again. Just like non-existence before birth was followed by a consciousness, so death would also be followed by a consciousness via a living brain.
It sounds like you've got a really weird, long form of reincarnation here, where like my consciousness is going to go into a different brain or something.
Yeah, I'm kind of confused too, because there doesn't seem to be any evidence for that, right? We don't have memories from one existence to the next, if that's what you're saying.
No, it's definitely not reincarnation. That's definitely not what we're saying. We're saying that it's a non-dualist idea. There's no souls or anything like that. Maybe I should use this short thought experiment to explain it better. Sure. So there's no souls. It's a completely naturalistic idea. No transferring of consciousness. The whole idea is based off of the naturalistic idea that brains do consciousness, that consciousness is a function of brains. And so a short thought experiment would be, if we were to imagine that every single conscious organism in the entire universe were to die right now, and every single consciousness is gone at that point, but then say, like, at some point in the future, excuse me, some point in the future, somehow a new conscious being is born somewhere in the universe. It doesn't matter where, but they're born, and so that now is the only consciousness that exists. That's the only one that's occurring at that point in time. So then, rather than all those people that died being in a black void, the only experience that exists at that point in time would be that the one being done by that one and only living brain.
Well,
And so,
I just have a question. Where do these, when you Thanos snap these consciousnesses, these living beings with consciousness, and you kill them, where does their consciousness go? It just stops existing, right?
correct. They just cease.
So why are we talking about, why are we talking about it? They're done, they're over with, right? Now sometime later you've got a new consciousness. So it knows nothing
like
about the previous ones.
It's like asking, like, if I blow out this candle, but then I strike a match over here, those are two completely separate events that both happen to involve fire, but they have nothing to do with each other. So if one consciousness dies and another one is born, cool. That those are two different events. They mean nothing, together.
Correct.
I don't understand what you're asking.
Well, instead of us anticipating an experience of nothingness after death, instead, because other brains will be doing consciousness after we die, then there will be experience after we die.
Someone else will be having an experience after we die. We will not.
Right.
If I get off of the roller coaster and the next car goes on, they are now riding the roller coaster. I am not. That doesn't mean that this is a continuous thing, right?
Right. Well, it will be consciousness being done by another brain. Like right now, consciousness is being done by this brain called Theodore, and consciousness is being done by a brain called Jim and a brain called Forrest. And if we were all to die right now, there would still be other brains doing consciousness.
Yeah, we're agreeing with that. We just don't see what the connection is. Yeah. What's the connection between someone who is, the consciousness of someone who's dead, and us? What's that connection?
There is actually no connection. That's where the word generic comes into it, because there's no personal continuity from me to the next consciousness.
So why do we care? What's so special about this that you want us to believe it?
What are you arguing for here? I'm sorry, I don't think I'm understanding. Like, what is the thing that you're trying to convince us of?
Well, one, it would answer for naturalists and naturalistic atheists, it would be the answer to what happens after we die, and it refutes the whole idea of people saying, well, after we die, there's nothingness, and
how does it refute that?
Oblivion. And
how does it refute that at all?
Because
someone else is now alive. That doesn't make me less dead. Yeah, so if I'm dead and I now have this lack of consciousness, I am now, because when you talk about oblivion and all this, like, I want to be clear, we're not saying that we are going to experience oblivion. We're not going to experience anything. We will. The consciousness stops, right? The fire is blown out. Like, it didn't go anywhere else. The candle is now out. So what does anyone else living have to do with me, have to do with my consciousness? How does that refute anything?
Okay, let's go back to, you said about the candles, right?
Yeah. If I blow out a candle, the fire didn't go to another candle. Another candle being lit doesn't change the state of this candle. The candle is blown out. The fire doesn't exist anymore. I die. My consciousness doesn't exist anymore. Same thing.
Correct. Okay, but the thing is, the room is still lit. You can still see the room, right?
By other candles, not this one. Yeah?
Yeah, exactly. So that's what consciousness isn't like the flame. Consciousness is like the illuminated room. It's like...
Okay, so now you're making a totally different claim, saying that consciousness has some sort of external thing beyond my mind. Are you talking about like the actions that I can perform? Or are you talking like some sort of like energy field that consciousness emerges from? What are you trying to get at?
I'm just talking about, like, consciousness is a way for the universe to basically see itself, in a sense.
That's a poetic way to say that we're made of stardust, but that doesn't track as far as like something physical existing.
Yeah, I'm not sure that you understand the concept well enough to explain it to us, because I mean, I think Forrest and I will both agree when we die, all kinds of things happen. We just don't know about it anymore, and we don't participate anymore
Yeah.
because we're dead, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know why it deserves a special name or all this rigmarole to explain what it is. When you die, you stop existing. The rest of the planet and every living thing in the universe continues on until they die.
Yep.
It doesn't seem to be special to me or shocking.
Well, okay, so let me ask you, what happened the last time you didn't exist? What happened after the last time you didn't exist?
I began existing at one point. So I didn't exist for billions of years. Life went on. And then, as you said at the beginning, then one day some cells arranged themselves into a brain that was mine. I began existing. Eventually I will stop existing. Those cells won't exist anymore. And billions more years will pass. This is not a magical thing.
Right. You are something a brain does. So you didn't exist, but then a brain did you. A brain is doing, like you in a generic sense, a brain is doing consciousness. So after this brain dies, if you imagine that after this brain dies and then another brain comes to exist somewhere else, it will do.
It has absolutely nothing to do with my brain, though.
Yeah,
a new brain coming. A newborn being born after I die has nothing to do with me dying.
I know it's not a continuation of you. It's just that there will be experience after this experience ends.
So someone else's experience, Like we all agree that some of us will die and then other people will be born. We all agree that there are consciousness that exist today and won't exist soon, and that new other we just don't see why there's why there needs to be a connection. There's no that doesn't make any sense to say that someone else gaining consciousness is a continuation of anything, has any connection whatsoever. It's like you talked about the consciousness is what a brain is doing. My brain is being for us today. Yeah, I would agree with that. The way that the tides are the result of all the water molecules and the moon working together. The tide is an emergent property of all these things. No one water molecule has tide, right? No one neuron is me. It's the emergent property of all of the electrochemical activity of my entire brain, all acting together, is me. If you destroy any one part of that, you would destroy a part of me. You can take out my frontal lobe and go study like Phineas Gage, right? If you take out a part of my brain, my personality would change. My experience would change. Does that mean that a part of me is now elsewhere doing something and it's just waiting for the rest of me? If someone dies of dementia or with dementia, with dementia, does that mean that little by little, just parts of them became another thing somewhere until it all formed together? What is any of that? I don't we all agree with your premise. It's where you're going with it that makes no sense at all. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, I agree with everything you just said too. The reason it matters is because instead of anticipating nothingness after death, we should anticipate that death would be followed by yet more consciousness, except for in different context.
For whom? Who would experience the consciousness after you die? Who would experience consciousness after you die?
Consciousness is a product of the brain. The self is an illusion. There is really.
I'm sorry. I really want to answer that question. Who is going to experience consciousness after you die?
Other sentient.
So
beings.
not you. Not you.
No.
So why would you expect more consciousness if you're not going to experience more consciousness? How does that make any sense? Why would you expect anything else but nothing?
I can't experience my own lack of existence. Only experience is experienced.
Precisely. So why would you expect anything but that? You will stop experiencing things. You will not even know you've stopped experiencing things because you're not experiencing things. You will stop. The same way you were before you were born. Nobody else was living for you then. You're not going to experience another consciousness. Nothing. It's just like I don't get where you're seeing a connection with you and anything else besides you.
My point is what you keep calling you, a you is a self, and a self is something that a brain does, just like
I agree.
Yeah,
a brain does. Yeah. So, okay, let me try it. So imagine that there's just, the entire universe is completely empty, devoid of all consciousness, and then
sure.
one single conscious organism comes to exist. And that's the only consciousness that's occurring, right? And so that's the only experience there is. And we'll just say that's you, Forrest or Jim, whoever.
Why not?
I feel we've just been down this road, and we're still not getting it, either because you don't understand it well enough to explain it to us, which is possible, or we're just not seeing where you're, because we're just not seeing where you're going with it. It makes no sense to talk about any experience after we're dead. We're dead. And yes, other people will still be alive.
Well, it means that the future after I'm dead matters. Like it matters because my effect on the future of those future consciousnesses, the things that I do in my life now, can affect those future.
That's a completely separate thing, though. Yeah, if I go and build a house, then someday after I'm dead, someone might live in that house. That has nothing to do with my consciousness after I die. It's my consciousness alive today that did a thing that has repercussions. You're just explaining the concept of a legacy or consequences for your actions. That's not a controversial idea. It's not anything mystical or magical.
Right.
But those...
I'm sorry, I don't get why that matters at all. I'm sorry.
Those future consciousnesses are the experiences that will be what's occurring at that point in time.
Yeah, we agree. We just don't see what the connection is.
But they're not you.
Right, because every time you go down this path, it sounds like you're talking about some form of reincarnation, and yet you say you're not talking about that. And this is where we're getting confused, right? Because we don't understand what the connection is then.
Some people do actually call generic subjective continuity. Some people do call it secular reincarnation or rebirth.
It makes about as much sense as religious reincarnation.
Yeah, it really does.
I'm sorry, man. You're not taking us anywhere interesting here.
And we've been over the same ground at least twice now. So why don't you think about it, find a better way to explain it, and give us a call back.
Okay. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks for your time, Theodore.
Bye.
Take care.
Okay.
Weird.
Yeah, and he said it came from Sam Harris, and I haven't read
don't think
everything
it did.
yeah, or at least he doesn't understand what Sam Harris said, and that's entirely possible.